Imagine this. You walk into a carnival funhouse on a warm summer night. Music echoes through the mirrors, the floor creaks beneath your feet, and then silence. You turn around, and the person you came with is gone. No scream, no trace. Just gone. In 1976, a young couple in Fairview stepped into the Carnival funhouse and never walked out. Their car was left behind, their belongings untouched, and the only thing the FBI found were 2 Carnival tickets, untorn, unused. If something like this happened in your town, how would you explain it? What if it was your family who never came back? Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another mystery like this one, because tonight, we're stepping into the funhouse, and some doors were never meant to be opened. Picture this. It's the summer of 1976, in a small American town called Fairview. The air is thick with heat and the smell of popcorn. Neon lights from the Ferris wheel flicker against the dusky sky, casting shifting shadows across the dirt parking lot where rows of cars sit under buzzing lampposts. A carnival has come to town, the kind of traveling fair that arrives once a year, transforming the quiet streets into a glowing wonderland of music, laughter, and motion. Families stroll, arm in arm. Children clutch balloons and cotton candy. Teenage boys show off by winning stuffed animals at ring toss games. The sound of carousel organs and rock music from the speakers blend together in the air, like a soundtrack of joy. To the people of Fairview, this carnival is escape. Escape from routine, from small-town boredom, from the long hot days of July. And somewhere in this crowd are Michael Harris and Laura Mitchell. He is 24 tall, with a lean build from working long hours at the hardware store. His jacket is worn at the edges, his hair curling slightly in the summer humidity. Laura, 22, is beside him, her pastel blue dress fluttering lightly in the warm night air, her smile soft and shy but unmistakably happy. She has just finished her second year of nursing school and talks endlessly about her plans for the future. Together, they look like any young couple in love, inseparable, moving through the crowd with their hands intertwined. Friends who saw them that night remembered small details. Michael buying her a bag of kettle corn and laughing when she got sugar on her lips. Laura tugging him toward the Ferris wheel, insisting they ride before the line got too long. From the top of the wheel, the whole carnival spread out below them. The spinning lights, the glow of the midway, the voices echoing like waves. Witnesses said. Laura leaned against Michael's shoulder, pointing at the view. "I wish this night never ended," she whispered. It would be the last thing anyone ever remembered her saying. When they stepped off the Ferris wheel, the night had only just begun. They strolled past the funhouse, its entrance lit by flashing bulbs and painted clowns with wide grins. Children darted in and out, their screams of delight bouncing off the mirrors inside. Michael and Laura paused. They exchanged a look. She laughed, shaking her head. "It's silly," she said, "but let's do it." At 10:15 p.m., they walked up to the ticket booth. The operator, a man in his 30s with tired eyes, took their stubs. He swore later that he saw them smile and wave as they disappeared into the mirrored hallway, and that was the last time anyone saw them. Inside, the funhouse was nearly empty. A few teenagers stumbled through, laughing at their stretched reflections. A family with 2 children made their way out the other side, but no one remembered crossing paths with Michael or Laura. When asked later, they shook their heads. "No, just us in there," one boy said. "We didn't see anyone else." At first, nothing seemed strange. Couples wandered off all the time. At the carnival, slipping behind rides to steal a kiss, heading down side streets to their cars. But as the hours passed, concern grew. By midnight, when Laura's parents arrived to drive her home, she was nowhere to be found. Michael's car sat in the dirt lot, the driver's side window cracked open, keys tucked in his denim jacket folded on the seat. In the back were the prizes they had won earlier. A small stuffed bear and a goldfish in a plastic bag. The bear's button eye was loose. The goldfish still swam in cloudy water. But Michael and Laura were gone. By 1 in the morning, Fairview police were on site. Officers fanned out across the midway, questioning ride operators, food vendors, and game workers. They searched the funhouse from top to bottom. Mirrors gleamed under their flashlights. Wooden floors creaked. Neon bulbs buzzed overhead. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No broken glass. No footprints leading away. One officer suggested maybe they left on foot, but Laura's purse sat in the car. along with her sandals, tucked neatly beneath the passenger seat. Everyone who knew her insisted she would never walk barefoot through the dirt lots and gravel roads of Fairview. Witness accounts poured in but only deepened the mystery. A teenage boy swore he saw Michael and Laura enter the funhouse at 10:15, remembering Laura's smile as she passed. A carnival worker claimed he saw Michael near the Ferris wheel after 11, but faltered when pressed. Maybe it was someone else, he admitted. A woman recalled hearing a scream near the funhouse exit, but carnival music drowned it out. Each account added fuel. None brought clarity. By dawn, word had spread. Flyers were printed before the sun rose. Families and neighbors gathered in groups, combing fields, barns, and wooded areas on the edge of town. Laura's mother clutched her daughter's scarf, tears running down her face, whispering, "She wouldn't just leave, not without telling me." Michael's father stood at the carnival gates long after the rides stopped, scanning each face in the thinning crowd as if his son might simply walk back in. But by sunrise, the carnival midway was empty. The Ferris wheel stood still. The laughter was gone. And so were Michael and Laura. Within a week, the FBI was called. Black sedans rolled into Fairview. Agents in dark suits walked the grounds, photographing stalls and rides, dusting surfaces for prints. They interviewed the carnival owners, checked payroll records, and scrutinized every worker. They dug into Michael and Laura's backgrounds, searching for any sign of a motive to run away. Nothing. Both had promising futures, plans, and deep roots in the community. They had left behind wallets, purses, clothes, everything. People do not vanish into thin air, and yet, they had. Then came the first shocking discovery. At the bottom of the ticket booth's drawer, agents found 2 unused carnival tickets. Serial numbers matched those issued to Michael and Laura. The stubs should have been torn when redeemed. Witnesses swore they saw the operator take them. And yet, here they were, untorn, untouched, as if the couple had never stepped inside. For the families, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch on for decades. For the FBI, it was a puzzle that refused to fit together. For the town of Fairview, it was the night their carnival stopped being a place of joy and became a place of fear. The days after Michael and Laura's disappearance bled together in Fairview. What had begun as whispers around kitchen tables turned into headlines that refused to fade. The FBI presence grew heavier. Their black cars lined the streets. Agents, with briefcases, moved in and out of the sheriff's office. And townsfolk who once waved at each other on the sidewalk now lowered their voices, casting suspicious glances at anyone who didn't belong. The carnival had packed up and rolled away, leaving behind only a flattened dirt lot and the acrid smell of gasoline. But to Fairview, it was as if the Midway still lingered, its ghost hanging in the air. Investigators worked methodically. They collected statements from every carnival employee, food vendors, ride operators, ticket takers. Most were drifters, seasonal workers who followed the carnival circuit from state to state. They gave vague answers and quickly moved on, their contracts finished. But one name stood out, a man who had vanished almost as completely as the couple themselves. Richard Donnelly, known to most as Rick, age 32, a drifter with no family ties, no permanent address, and a record of petty thefts stretching back a decade. He had been hired in cash to operate the funhouse ticket booth the very week Michael and Laura disappeared. When agents tried to question him, they learned he was gone. He had left 2 days after the couple vanished, abandoning the small trailer he rented behind a gas station at the edge of town. Agents searched the trailer. The air smelled of cigarettes and stale beer. Inside, they found little: a duffel bag with a few shirts, a pair of worn boots, empty matchbooks, and tucked beneath a thin mattress, a single carnival ticket, untorn, on the back. Scribbled in black ink were 2 words that chilled the agents who found it: "They're mine." Word spread fast. In a small town, nothing stays secret for long. Soon, everyone in Fairview whispered about Donnelly. Some said he had been seen drinking alone in bars, staring at doors as if expecting someone to walk through. Others claimed he was obsessed with the funhouse, spending nights inside after the gates closed. Parents told their children to remember his face, though in truth most only knew the rumors, not the man himself. The FBI followed what little trail there was. They checked bus depots, diners, motels in neighboring towns. A waitress insisted she had served Donnelly breakfast one morning, that he kept glancing at the door nervously. A motel clerk swore a man matching his description had checked in under a false name. But there were no receipts, no signatures, nothing concrete. It was as if Donnelly had dissolved into thin air, just as Michael and Laura had. By August, the town was unraveling. Grocery store aisles buzzed with speculation. Church sermons ended with whispered prayers for the missing. Parents forbade their children from leaving the house after dark. Neighbors turned suspicious eyes on each other. Some claimed they saw figures near the empty carnival grounds at night, shadows moving in the dirt lot as if the rides were still there. Others swore they heard carnival music drifting on the wind, faint and warped, even though the carnival was long gone. Then came the discovery that pulled the families deeper into despair. A farmer, clearing his field 2 miles from the carnival grounds, found a shoe half buried in mud. When he picked it up, he realized it was a woman's sandal. The strap snapped, the heel caked in dried earth. He turned it over to the sheriff's office. Laura's mother identified it immediately. It was the pair Laura had been wearing the night she vanished. For the FBI, it was listed as critical evidence, but even they couldn't explain how the shoe had traveled so far into a field that had been searched days earlier. Some believed it had been dropped later, planted like a cruel taunt. Others whispered that it had been carried there by someone or something that still roamed the countryside at night. At a tense town meeting, residents demanded answers. Are they alive? Did the carnival take them? Why haven't you found the worker? Agent Robert Avery stood at the podium, his voice flat, rehearsed. The investigation is ongoing. We cannot disclose details at this time. His words only enraged the families further. Laura's mother broke down in tears, screaming, "You found her shoe. Tell me what that means." But Avery gave nothing away. Behind closed doors, his notes told another story. Evidence suggests deliberate planting. Possible staged abduction. Secondary party involvement. Whispers of conspiracy spread like wildfire. Some townsfolk believed the carnival was a front for trafficking, moving people unseen along its circuit. Others whispered that it was cursed, that something about its funhouse mirrors bent more than light. A few swore the carnival itself wasn't moving at all, that it was the same one looping back, disguising itself with new workers each year. As fall settled in, the FBI studied the carnival's blueprints. They discovered that the funhouse had been designed with mirrored corridors, trick doors, and crawl spaces for staff. But beneath the structure was something more unusual, a service tunnel not listed in the official permits. Could Michael and Laura have been led there? Could Rick Donnelly have used it to spirit them away unseen? By the time agents traced the carnival, it was 3 states away. The funhouse dismantled, the tunnel gone, the evidence erased. In November, a carnival worker from Kansas stepped forward. He claimed Donnelly had been drinking heavily one night, boasting about his power. He said he could make people vanish, the man told agents. Said nobody would ever find them. He laughed about it. When shown photographs of Michael and Laura, the worker's face drained of color. "Yeah," he whispered. "Those two." He mentioned them. The FBI prepared to notarize his statement, but before they could, the man vanished too. His trailer left unlocked, clothes in the closet, dinner still warm on the stove. Then, in December of 1976, a package arrived at the Fairview police station. It was wrapped in brown paper. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside were 2 carnival tickets, both unowned, both with the names Michael and Laura scrawled on the back in fresh ink. When tested, the ink revealed a chilling detail. It wasn't from 1976. It was brand new. The evidence was undeniable. Someone was still playing with them. Someone wanted the town to believe that Michael and Laura weren't gone at all, but alive, watching, waiting. By the beginning of 1977, Fairview was no longer just another small American town. It had become a symbol. Newspapers called it cursed, reporters called it haunted. And across the country people whispered about the couple who vanished inside a carnival funhouse. The New York Times ran a Sunday feature with the headline, "The Carnival Couple. How 2 young lovers vanished in plain sight." Television crews parked vans outside the sheriff's office. Journalists knocked on the family's doors. The story reached talk shows and late-night hosts, twisting a tragedy into entertainment. But for the families, it was no show. It was agony that never ended. Laura's mother sat before cameras, clutching her daughter's scarf, tears running freely as she begged for her baby to come home. Michael's father, once soft-spoken, grew hard and bitter. "They don't care about finding them," he told a reporter. "They care about selling headlines." Yet the national attention did something the local police never could. It forced the FBI to widen their search. Special Agent Robert Avery returned to Fairview, but now he wasn't just a faceless investigator. He was a man under siege. Every press conference turned hostile. Reporters shouted about the untorn tickets, the shoe in the farmer's field, the missing carnival worker Rick Donnelly. Avery repeated the same lines. The investigation is ongoing. We cannot comment on details, but his hands trembled when he spoke. His jaw tightened when asked about the tickets. Some in the crowd swore they saw guilt in his eyes. Others swore they saw fear. By spring, new rumors spread like wildfire. The carnival was returning. Posters began to appear in nearby towns, stapled to telephone poles and pasted on store windows. They promised fun for the whole family, with bold fonts and bright colors. Rides, prizes, cotton candy, fireworks. To outsiders, it was innocent. But to the people of Fairview, it was a wound torn open again. How could they continue to operate after what had happened? How could families laugh beneath the Ferris wheel when two young lovers were still missing? Protests formed quickly. Parents organized caravans to follow the carnival's trucks. Ministers preached sermons against its corruption. Families of Michael and Laura made signs with their faces, demanding justice. When the carnival set up just 20 miles away, hundreds gathered at the gates. They carried candles, torches, megaphones. They shouted, "Where are Michael and Laura? FBI, stop hiding the truth." Inside the gates, music played, rides spun, and children laughed, as if nothing had ever happened. Only one ride remained closed. The funhouse, a crude sign hung from its chain, out of order. But that didn't stop the whispers. Protesters swore they heard sounds inside. Faint pounding, muffled screams, cries echoing against glass. Some pressed their ears to the plywood walls, certain they heard a woman's voice calling out, "Help us." The FBI dismissed it as hysteria, but the crowd wasn't convinced. Fear turned into rage. That was when Isabella Duarte arrived. A journalist from Chicago, Duarte was known for chasing stories that others abandoned. She had read about the carnival couple and decided to see for herself. Unlike the television crews who came for sound bites, Duarte stayed. She talked to locals late into the night, scribbling in her notebook as mothers wept and fathers clenched their fists. She walked the abandoned lot where the carnival had once stood, running her fingers along the dirt as if it could speak. She pressed her recorder to the funhouse wall during the protest, capturing only static. But then, buried in the hiss, she heard it. A voice, a woman's voice, thin and distorted, but unmistakable. One word, "Please." Duarte played the tape at the next press conference. The room erupted. Families screamed, reporters shouted, cameras flashed. Avery dismissed it immediately. Carnivals are loud places. What you're hearing is background noise. But his denial only stoked the fire. The crowd erupted, chanting until Avery was forced to leave the podium. The FBI had lost the public. Duarte had gained them. She dug deeper. Weeks later, following a hunch, she traced a lead to a warehouse in a nearby city, leased under the carnival's name. She broke in late at night, the air heavy with dust and oil. Inside, crates were stacked high, labeled Funhouse spare parts. But when she pried one open, she didn't find parts. She found belongings, shoes, purses, wallets, hundreds of them, piled like relics of vanished lives. Some dated back years, some decades, and among them were things that froze her blood. Laura's nursing school ID badge, Michael's engraved lighter, both perfectly intact, as if untouched by time. She snapped photographs in a frenzy, her hands shaking. But when she developed the film the next day, something was wrong. Every crate was gone. The warehouse looked empty, except for one detail she hadn't noticed before. In one frame, a tall mirror leaned against the wall, and in its reflection stood Michael and Laura, side by side, smiling faintly. Duarte stared at the image for hours, unable to decide if it was hope or horror. She showed it to Sheriff Monroe, who shook her head slowly. "They're toying with you," she said. "With all of us. They want us chasing shadows." But Duarte couldn't let it go. If the photo was real, it meant Michael and Laura hadn't vanished into thin air. They were somewhere tied to the carnival, its mirrors, its endless loop of towns, somewhere waiting to be found. Meanwhile, Fairview burned with paranoia. Parents whispered that the carnival wasn't a series of traveling rides at all, but a trap that circled back again and again, swallowing people whole. Children dreamed of laughing clowns that reached for them through mirrors. Families of the missing gathered nightly at the church, candles flickering as they begged for answers. The carnival was no longer entertainment. It was a wound, and every time the music returned, the wound bled anew. By the summer of 1977, the protests boiled over. Hundreds gathered again at the carnival gates, torches lighting the night sky. Chants shook the midway. FBI agents braced for a riot as the crowd surged. Inside, the rides stopped spinning. The music cut out. For one terrible moment, all was silent. And then, from within the shuttered funhouse, came a sound. 3 steady knocks, as if someone was trying to get out. The crowd froze. Agents shouted. Families screamed. Reporters shoved forward. But when they broke down the door, the funhouse stood empty. Mirrors shattered under the beams of flashlights. Floors creaked. Dust hung in the air. Nothing. No Michael. No Laura. No one. But the sound lingered, echoing in every heart that heard it. The night of the protest left Fairview shaken. For hours the crowd had pressed against the carnival gates, chanting, screaming, demanding answers. The 3 knocks from inside the funhouse had silenced them all. But when the FBI broke down the door and found nothing, the silence turned into fury. Parents shouted at the agents, accusing them of lies and cover-ups. Children clung to their mothers, terrified of the flashing lights and the chaos that had replaced the laughter of the carnival. When the crowd finally dispersed, the midway lay in ruins, trash and torn signs scattered across the dirt. But the sound of those knocks lingered. People swore they could still hear it in their dreams. The next morning, Fairview looked more like a war zone than a small town. Windows were shuttered, shops closed early, families refused to let their children leave home. At the diner, regulars spoke in hushed voices. 3 knocks, one man muttered, shaking his head. That was them. That was Michael and Laura. Another woman swore she had seen their faces reflected in the broken glass when the funhouse door was smashed open. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. The town believed it, and belief is what drove the fear deeper. Sheriff Monroe stood on the courthouse steps that afternoon, addressing a crowd of reporters. She looked tired, older than her years. "This town has suffered enough," she said. "We deserve the truth. We deserve answers. And if the Bureau won't give them to us, then we'll find them ourselves." Her voice cracked on the last words. Families in the crowd wept. And for the first time, the sheriff wasn't seen as an authority figure, but as one of them, another parent haunted by the disappearance. Inside FBI headquarters, Robert Avery wrote furiously in his notes, "Theatrics escalating, civil unrest imminent, evidence being staged deliberately to provoke response." His tone in public was calm, but privately his words betrayed desperation. He knew the families were right about one thing. Someone was playing with them, someone who wanted the town to spiral into chaos. And every time the Bureau thought they had control, the carnival shifted shape and slipped through their fingers. In late August, another discovery rattled Fairview. A janitor at the police station, mopping the floor outside the evidence room, noticed an envelope tucked beneath the door. Inside were 2 small carnival prizes, cheap stuffed bears with button eyes. At first glance, they were worthless. But when agents cut them open, something fell out. From one bear, a silver ring engraved with the initials MH from the other. A locket with Laura's picture inside. The news leaked instantly. Families demanded to know how the couple's belongings could appear months after their disappearance, sewn into toys that had been handed out at the carnival. Some insisted it was proof they were alive. Others whispered it was proof they were dead, their keepsakes scattered as trophies. Laura's mother clutched the locket to her chest, sobbing, while Michael's father stormed into the FBI office, slamming his fists against the desk. "You've known all along," he shouted. "You've been hiding them from us." Avery stared back, expressionless, but his silence only fueled suspicion. Journalist Isabella Duarte pursued the lead relentlessly. She tracked down carnival suppliers, traced receipts, interviewed workers who had since left the circuit. Most refused to talk. A few hinted at something darker. One man told her, "It's not just this town. There've been others, places that lost people when the carnival came through. You start asking too many questions, and you disappear too." Duarte pressed him for details, but 2 days later, his trailer was found empty, his dinner still on the stove. Fairview descended into paranoia. Families stopped attending church, convinced their neighbors might be involved. Children whispered about mirrors that moved on their own. Some swore that if you looked too long into the funhouse glass, You didn't see yourself, you saw Michael and Laura staring back. People reported hearing carnival music in the distance, even when the rides were gone. Faint calliope tunes drifting through the night air like a ghostly echo. Then came the photograph. In September, another envelope arrived, slipped under the door of the local newspaper. It contained a single black and white photo, grainy but chilling. The image appeared to be taken from inside the funhouse, mirrors stretching in every direction, and in the background, half hidden in the reflections, stood two figures, Michael and Laura, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, staring straight into the camera. The paper published the image the next morning. The town erupted. People crowded the newspaper office, clutching copies of the photo as if it were holy scripture. Some said it proved the couple was alive, trapped inside the funhouse. Others claimed it was staged, a cruel trick meant to keep the wound open. Duarte analyzed the print under magnification. The shadows were wrong, the angles impossible. It wasn't just a photo, it was a message. Someone wanted the town to see it. Someone wanted the families to lose sleep every night, wondering if their children were still out there, trapped in a hall of mirrors. That evening, hundreds gathered again at the carnival site. Though the rides were gone, they lit candles and placed them in a line where the funhouse had once stood. The flickering lights stretched across the dirt like a ghostly midway. Parents wept, children clutched missing posters, and then, just before midnight, a sound rippled through the stillness. Not music, not laughter, a single knock, slow, heavy, as if someone or something was answering the candles. The crowd gasped, some screamed, others dropped to their knees in prayer. But when deputies searched the lot with flashlights, they found nothing. The ground was bare, the mirrors were gone, only silence remained. The FBI doubled their presence, but their authority meant little now. Fairview had stopped believing in law and order. They believed in the carnival's curse, in the mirrors that swallowed people whole, in the 3 knocks that echoed through their nights. The town was no longer waiting for answers, it was waiting for the next disappearance. By the start of 1978, Fairview felt like it had been moved a few inches to the left of reality. You could stand in the empty lot where the Ferris wheel used to spin and still hear the echo of laughter in the dirt, the phantom creak of boards that weren't there anymore. Reporters kept returning because the story refused to die. Radio callers argued about mirrors and tunnels. Magazine writers flew in, took photos of the church steps and the diner booths, and then flew out with headlines that made the families feel like props. The FBI thickened around town again, new agents with new briefcases, as if fresh paper could change old facts. Robert Avery didn't smile anymore. He had the look of a man who had been arguing with the same locked door for too long, and had started to suspect the door could hear him. It was Isabella Duarte who wouldn't let the door be. She carried the warehouse photo like a lit match, careful and dangerous, showing it only to people who could handle fire. In the right light you could see what she meant, a tall mirror, leaning against a wall, and in its reflection to people who shouldn't be in any warehouse at all. Michael, leaning slightly, the way he always did when Laura was talking. Laura, chin up, eyes searching for the person holding the camera. The families begged Duarte to publish, to force the Bureau to act. She didn't. Not yet. She wanted one more piece. One more nail that would make the story hold. The nail came from a place nobody expected. A retired electrician named Earl, who had wired the carnival rides for decades, came forward with a box of brittle papers and a conscience that had started waking him at 3 in the morning. He spread schematics across Duarte's motel bed, diagrams of the funhouse power runs and emergency shutoffs, grease pencil notes about hidden maintenance hatches. They said these were to pull kids out if they got scared, he muttered, tapping a penciled square beneath the mirror maze. But there's no code-compliant egress here. This door goes to a crawl space that goes to nothing I ever saw built. He showed her a photo of a panel he'd been told never to touch. The label was hand-stamped in crooked letters. Clock. It was always set to a different time than the midway, he said. They said it kept the illusions synced. Duarte stared at the word until it stopped being a word and became a threat. A clock that wasn't supposed to match anything else. The Bureau kept insisting there were no credible signs of foul play. Still, that spring they brought in divers for the old irrigation pond behind the fairground, the place where generators once drew their cooling water. The pond was small, muddy, insignificant until it wasn't. The first winch line came up, with nothing more than a blanket of silt. The second line rattled against something that rang like a bell. When it finally broke the surface, a panel truck emerged, paint scabbed off in plates, windows gone, a ghost of a vehicle that had no business being under that much mud. They cut the rear doors. The smell hit the line like a wall. Inside they found what Duarte had feared since the day she opened the warehouse crate. Belongings wrapped in plastic, labeled in a hand someone had practiced to look official. Purses, wallets, a row of children's shoes, nested together like shells. A dress, the size of a 7-year-old, sequins, dulled but still catching sun. The bureau logged each item, sealed each bag, then sealed the room where they stored them. Officially, the pond yielded miscellaneous debris. Unofficially, the town learned anyway. Secrets dissipate in Fairview like steam off hot asphalt. You can tell yourself that you want answers, that any truth is better than none. But the thing nobody tells you is that answers don't arrive clean. They come wet and heavy and missing pieces. They stain the floor. They make new questions grow in their place, like mold. The families wanted to burn the carnival to the ground. The bureau wanted to move the story into a room with no windows. Duarte wanted to go back into the warehouse with a bolt cutter and a witness and a live camera. Sheriff Monroe wanted her badge to mean something again, so they planned something that wasn't exactly a plan. The next time the carnival came within driving distance to counties over, late June, the families would protest at the front gate. Duarte would slip around the back with Earl's maps, find the service hatch he swore had never been inspected, and point a lens where the bureau kept telling her there was nothing to see. Monroe didn't bless it. She just didn't stop it. It was hot enough to warp the horizon when the caravans rolled in, station wagons and pickups with hand-painted signs strapped to their sides. Meet us in the mirrors and where are Michael and Laura? Mothers gripping photographs that had been copied so many times they'd turned gray at the edges. Fairgoers slowed, uneasy, and then pretended nothing was wrong because people are good at that when they've already paid for wristbands. The carnival soundtrack carried the way it always does, organ pipes and rock songs and people trying to talk louder than the noise. Somewhere in there, a voice like a calliope breathed the word you didn't want to hear: please. Duarte moved, like she'd rehearsed it, past the cotton candy, past the ring toss, into the tight space behind the funhouse facade, where the painted smiles looked rotten up close. Earl's sketch said the hatch would be waist-high, painted black, 6 screws, that didn't belong to any standard kit. She found it beneath a plywood lip, exactly where a hand would skim right past if it was busy holding tickets. 2 screws had fresh scratches. Someone had been here not long ago. She lifted, and stale cold air sighed out like a breath kept her. Long. Inside was a crawlspace big enough for one person to hate. She slid forward on elbows, breathing dust and the sort of fear that makes people religious for 5 minutes. The space widened into a maintenance shelf where light from some other world crept in through the seams. She eased her camera through and tilted it down. Not cables, not ducting, mirrors, not on walls beneath, like a floor made of clipped reflections. The glass showed the funhouse above, the empty corridor where patrons were supposed to laugh at their long legs and wide heads. But it also showed something else, a second corridor that wasn't there, running alongside the first at a slant that made her eyes water. In that wrong-angle hallway, 2 figures stood with their hands almost touching the glass. A man with a tired lean, a woman with her chin up like she was learning how to be brave. Duarte bit down on a sound that would have given her away and hit the shutter. The figures didn't vanish. They did something worse. They looked up, not at the funhouse, at her, on the midway. The families began to chant. Protest bleeds into prayer if you stand in the sun long enough. FBI agents moved in a line that wanted to be calm and kept slipping toward panic. Sheriff Monroe told people to stay back and found herself shoulder to shoulder with a mother who refused to move. Avery arrived late, jacket off, tie loosened, as if answering a question he didn't want to hear. He was still looking at the crowd when a sound rolled out of the funhouse wall like a fist on a door. 1, 2, 3. The same unhurried cadence Fairview had taught itself to hate. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted, "Open it." A father hurled his shoulder into the chain, and the chain bit back. For a thin slice of a second, everyone was the same person with the same choice: break it or break yourself. The bureau broke first. Bolt cutters snapped. The chain fell. The door stuttered, open. The cool inside breath met the heat outside like 2 strangers at a wedding. Agents stepped forward with flashlights raised. The glass showed only what it wanted. themselves, long-legged and wide-headed and ridiculous. But as the beams crossed, one mirror flashed a scene that wasn't the corridor at all. A car interior, a dashboard cracked where a ring hand had wrapped it 100 times. Two faces reflected where headlights should be. Duarte watched it from the crawlspace and made the mistake of speaking to it the way you speak to the living. "Laura," she whispered. The mirror fogged like someone breathed on the other side. The camera in her hands became suddenly so heavy, she almost dropped it. Avery shouted for the funhouse to be cleared. "Get everyone out," he barked, the words sounding like he wanted them out of the town and the state and the century. An agent near the power panel reached for a switch behind a hinged plate stenciled in crooked letters. Clockrell's voice wasn't there to warn him not to touch it, so nobody did. The switch stayed in the position it had been in before anyone arrived, set 5 minutes off midway time. As if the ride didn't want to breathe on the same beat as the rest of the world. You tell yourself you're ready for answers. Then a door you didn't know was a door goes a quarter-inch wider, and your whole body understands you were lying. From somewhere below or behind or before, glass began to tick, not like breaking but like settling. 1,000 tiny decisions happening at once. The floor of the funhouse hummed. The mirror Duarte was filming from the backside filled with movement that wasn't her. Shapes pressed close, as if crowding a window on a train that had finally pulled into a station. A palm struck the glass, from the wrong side, skin pale, a small birthmark, like a crescent near the thumb. Laura's Duarte knew it, the way you know your own handwriting. "We hear you," she said, forgetting to be a reporter, remembering to be human. "Where are you?" People will spend years thinking of the right question, and find out there was only ever this one. "Are you here?" The mouth on the other side formed a word that didn't travel. The mirror fogged and cleared, a heartbeat written in breath. This is where every story argues with itself. The bureau says secure the scene. The families say open the door. The carnival says keep the show moving. The journalist says keep the camera up. You, if you're honest, say please let the answer be the kind you can carry. Sheriff Monroe put her palm flat to the glass, as if touch could be contagious. Avery reached for her wrist and then thought better of it, because there are moments when authority is the thing that gets people killed. For a full second longer than was safe. The world held dot, then every wristwatch on every agent beeped in ragged unison and rolled 5 minutes forward to match the midway clock. Nobody touched a thing. The funhouse did the math for them. Something in the walls sighed, a sound like a train braking in a tunnel you can't see. The figures in the wrong angle corridor blurred and stepped back at the same time and stayed where they were. Duarte's shutter clicked uselessly against an image that refused to be caught. In the crawlspace, a trickle of dust came down, as if the building had exhaled. Panic doesn't look like screaming. Not at first. It looks like everyone deciding to be the person who will fix it and discovering at the exact same instant that there is nothing to fix. Someone knocked over a stanchion. Someone stumbled and pulled 3 people with them. An agent yelled clear and tried to herd a dozen griefs through a single door. In the press, an elderly man fell, and a teenage boy hauled him up by the elbow, and for one bright second the town remembered it was still a town. Then the power cut. The mirrors went black. The hum stopped. The heat of the midway rushed in like weather. The only sound left was people trying not to cry. When the generators kicked back a minute later, the corridor was exactly what the blueprint promised. Plywood and glass and light arrays that made ordinary faces look strange. The clock plate sat, the way it had, needle at 5 minutes off, like a dare. Duarte wriggled backward and dropped to the gravel behind the facade, hands shaking, the camera pressed so hard to her ribs it would leave a bruise. She checked the last capture, static, where a face had been a blank pane, where breath had written a plea. She wanted to throw the camera across the lot. Instead, she slid down the wall and let herself breathe until breathing felt like something she had once known how to do. That evening the bureau wrapped the funhouse in tape and tarps and language that meant go away. The families did not go away. They sat in lawn chairs under the sodium lights like people keeping vigil outside a hospital room. Sheriff Monroe brought coffee and didn't tell them to leave. Avery called Washington and didn't say the words he was thinking. Earl sat on his porch and stared at a pocket watch he hadn't wound in 40 years. Duarte typed until her fingers cramped and then stopped, because some sentences refused to be in the same room as a keyboard. You would like a neat end to the day. That isn't how Fairview works. just before midnight, when the generators were down to a mutter and the guards were yawning at the same time. A deputy doing a slow loop of the site noticed movement behind the tarps. He called out, "No answer." He lifted the corner and swept his flashlight in a long arc. On the inside of the canvas, someone had pressed a ticket stub into the weave so hard it punctured. The serial number matched Laura's second ticket. It was Untorn on the back, in fresh ink that hadn't had time to dry. 2 words had been written in a hand that matched the electrified jitter of the first. Message in Rick Donnelly's trailer, only this time the words weren't a claim. They were a warning, "Don't look." And the ink when they tested it the next morning wasn't from any pen sold in 1978. By 1979, Fairview no longer felt like a town on a map. It felt like a scar you could point to but never really heal. The carnival hadn't returned that year, but its absence didn't bring comfort. If anything, it made people more uneasy, like the silence that follows a slammed door. People kept expecting the music to start again, the glow of bulbs against the sky, the taste of sugar in the air. Instead, they were left with empty lots, restless nights, and a story that refused to fade. The FBI had sealed the funhouse incident under layers of paperwork and nondisclosure reports labeled the findings unsubstantiated. The photographs Duarte had taken came back from forensic labs with notes claiming exposure flaws. But in Fairview, everyone remembered. They remembered the knocks. They remembered the faces in the glass. And most of all, they remembered the words scrawled on the back of the ticket, pinned to the tarp. "Don't look." Sheriff Monroe tried to keep order, but she was losing the town. Families no longer trusted deputies. Churches split between those who wanted to pray the carnival away and those who whispered about fighting back. Shopkeepers taped over their mirrors. Children refused to go near the empty lot where the Ferris wheel had once turned. Even sunlight seemed thinner there, weaker somehow, as though the ground itself remembered what it had seen. Isabella Duarte wouldn't stop digging. She drove across state lines following fragments-old police logs, missing person reports from towns the carnival had visited years before. In Missouri, she found a family whose teenage son had vanished in 1968. In Ohio, a farmer's daughter gone in 1972. Each disappearance matched the carnival's route. Each file ended the same way, unresolved, and each time Duarte knocked on a family's door, they opened it with the same hollow look. The look of people who had been told too many times that their child just ran away. She compiled their stories in a binder, thick as a Bible, and called it the pattern. When she brought it back to Fairview, Avery refused to see her. He was tired, gray, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. "You're feeding hysteria," he said flatly through the sheriff's office door. "We have no evidence of a pattern." Duarte slid the binder across his desk anyway. "You have more than evidence," she shot back. "You have proof. You just won't admit it." He didn't open it, not then. That fall, something unexpected happened. A fisherman 3 counties over pulled a waterlogged envelope from the river. Inside was a Polaroid photograph. The image was murky, but when dried, it revealed 2 faces. Michael and Laura, sitting in their Cavalier, alive, smiling faintly, and stamped across the corner, August 1979, 3 years after they had disappeared. The photo spread like wildfire. Some swore it was proof the couple was alive, hidden somewhere, and taunting those left behind. Others argued it was staged, a cruel trick, a copy of an older picture with a forged date. But the lab tests came back the same way they had before. The chemicals were real. The photo stock was authentic. There was no sign of tampering. Someone had taken that picture in 1979. The families clung to it. Laura's mother framed the Polaroid, placing it beside the candle she lit each night in her daughter's window. Michael's father carried a copy in his wallet, pulling it out to show strangers like a man desperate to prove his son still existed. But for others in Fairview, the photo was not hope. It was horror. Because if the couple was alive, then where were they? And why hadn't they come home? The carnival finally returned the next summer. Its posters appeared overnight, stapled to telephone poles, pasted to shop windows. Fun for the whole family. They read, the same bright colors, the same bold fonts, as if nothing had ever happened. But Fairview wasn't the same town it had been. When the trucks rolled in and the rides began to rise from the ground, families didn't line up with their children. They locked their doors. They pulled their curtains. And yet still, crowds came from outside towns, from curious cities. from places that had only heard the story and wanted to see for themselves. Protesters gathered at the gates again, this time with more rage than before. Signs waved, chants thundered. FBI agents stood in a line, faces blank, as if their bodies alone could keep order. And somewhere in the press of voices, Duarte moved with her camera, ready to catch whatever the mirrors refused to show. That night, as the ride spun and the music swelled, a girl no older than 9 disappeared. Her parents had turned for just a moment, buying popcorn. When they looked back, she was gone. The fairground shut down in panic. Searchlights combed the lot. Voices shouted her name into the dark. Hours later she was found, standing at the edge of the funhouse. She was barefoot, her eyes glassy, and in her hand was a carnival ticket. Untorn. When asked where she had been, she only whispered one word: mirrors. The crowd erupted. Parents screamed. Protesters surged. And for the first time, the FBI admitted what they had denied for years. The funhouse was closed indefinitely. Workers were reassigned. But everyone knew the truth. Closing a door didn't change what lived behind it. Late that night, Duarte developed the film from her camera. Most of the shots were chaos, faces blurred, lights streaked. But in one frame, clear and sharp, the little girl stood at the edge of the funhouse holding her untorn ticket. And behind her, in the mirror, stood Michael and Laura, staring out. By the end of that summer, the town had learned how to move without breathing. You could feel it in the way doors opened, just a crack, and hands stayed on the chain. In the way conversations stopped when a reflection happened to line up wrong on a cafe window. The FBI widened its perimeter until yellow tape felt like a new kind of fence around Fairview's heart. Reporters came and went, but Isabella Duarte stayed, orbiting the funhouse like a moon that refused to fall. She kept the latest Polaroid tucked in a hard plastic sleeve. Michael and Laura in the mirror behind the little girl, eyes leveled as if they were the ones evaluating you. If you held the picture too long, your stomach fluttered like you'd crested a hill. People asked if it was hope. Duarte said it was proof. She never clarified of what. The Bureau brought in specialists nobody would name out loud. Men and women who wore plain clothes but moved like they were used to rooms that locked from the outside. They rolled in carts marked with innocent words: electrical calibration. Audio then built a lab in a trailer and called it a staging area. Sheriff Monroe watched them work with a face that had learned how not to flinch. Robert Avery had started, carrying his jacket over his arm even when the heat didn't call for it. He looked like a man halfway through leaving, who had forgotten where he intended to go. Duarte obtained something she was not supposed to have, an internal memo stamped with a red bar and a word that made people lower their voices. The memo described a clock discipline plan for the funhouse. Keep all timekeeping devices on site 5 minutes off the midway. Do not allow synchronization with external reference. Do not under any circumstance wind the mechanical master behind the mirror wall. It read like superstition written by an engineer. She took it to Earl, the retired electrician, and the old man nodded the way people nod at thunderstorms. Knew it, he said softly, like the phrase had been living under his tongue for years. They kept it off on purpose. To keep the pictures from lining up, the Bureau tried to control the story with pressers and calm phrasing that sounded like sedatives. But you can't sedate a town that's decided to wake up. Parents met in church basements and school gyms. Someone printed handbills with the words "do not match the clocks" and passed them out like communion. Teenagers spray-painted "don't look" in thick black letters under the overpass and then crossed it out themselves at dawn when the words looked too much like a dare. A new rumor slipped through the grocery aisles, a list of names quietly kept by families in 4 states, children and couples, and one old man who used to sweep the midway at closing time. All of them vanishing within a day of the carnival setting. Upshop. Duarte began calling it what the Bureau would not, a pattern. And the carnival, because of course it did, returned anyway. Not to Fairview proper, not yet, but near enough that the lights painted the clouds over town. The posters were the same smiling lies. Fun for the whole family. The same fonts, the same color bars, the same stock photo of a Ferris wheel in an evening that pretended it couldn't end. When the trucks rolled in at dusk, the first thing they assembled wasn't a ride. It was the funhouse. Frame up like a rib cage, mirrors going in like teeth. Workers moved fast and unspeaking. Eyes down, as if the air itself had a supervisor. You told yourself you wouldn't go, then you found yourself there anyway, because not looking had become the thing that hurt. Protesters lined the entrance with candles and jars. The wick smoke curled in the heat like scribbled warnings. Families held photographs high above their heads. Deputies stood with their palms out in a stance meant to reassure, and somehow didn't. Avery walked the perimeter, not touching anything, like a man bracing for a wave. The little girl who had vanished and returned stood with her parents, barefoot still by choice now, her toes cat-like against the asphalt. When Duarte knelt to greet her, the girl didn't smile. "They don't like when the music stops," she whispered, and Duarte felt the words like a breath at the back of her neck. At 9 that night, the power blipped, a hiccup, a blink. Rides coasted on momentum for a heartbeat. The calliope coughed and came back a half-beat off, the tune wrong enough to raise bumps on your arms. Earl, hovering with a coil of wire like a talisman, glanced at his old pocket watch. The second hand stuttered and then continued. "They're sinking," he said to nobody, and then too loudly to somebody. "Keep your phones off. Don't look at the time." A boy laughed and checked his wrist anyway. In the funhouse wall, a thin mirrored seam breathed out a fog that should have been too cold for August. The Bureau sent divers into the irrigation pond again because when you don't know where to look, you look where the last bad thing came from. This time they found not a truck but a crate fat with water. Inside, wrapped objects labeled in clipped block letters: duck shoot, PHOTO booth, ring toss, as if parts of the Midway had been catalogued for a museum nobody would admit existed. Among the soggy paper and rusted hardware lay an item sealed in waxed canvas. When they teased it open in the trailer, the room went small. 2 Carnival tickets, serial numbers that traced back to the night in 1976. Untorn, backed with a message in a hand you could recognize by its exhausted angle. "We tried." The ink bled when Avery's thumb brushed it. He excused himself and stayed outside long enough for the wind to dry his face. Duarte caught a different kind of break. A ride mechanic who'd burned through 3 fake names and 5 state lines sat across from her in a diner and wrapped both hands around a coffee like it was a ritual. "We don't build the funhouse like the plans," he said. "We build what they send." Prefab sections marked with chalk we're told not to wipe off. Sometimes there's an extra wall where a wall shouldn't go. Sometimes the hall measures longer on the inside. We chalk it up to bad lumber. Then we go home, and the dreams come. He glanced at the window, at his face split into 2 on the glass. "I don't grease mirrors for a living, lady, but sometimes I hear the bearings hum." "Back there," she asked the question that had been eating his tongue. "Who's they?" He tried to answer twice and failed both times. "Not us," he said finally. It sounded like confession and relief and failure in one breath. He gave her a mailing address that wasn't a place and told her to send the photos he knew she had to it in case he disappeared again. He left cash under the saucer and stepped into the night without turning around. The bell over the door rang once and then a second time faster, like a skipped heartbeat. By the 3rd night, the protests had swollen into something like a siege. The Bureau erected floodlights that made the funhouse look like a stage set for a tragedy that hadn't yet been written. Sheriff Monroe stood in the spill of white with her hands open. "Not one step past the tape," she called. And parents who had already stepped past 2 marriages and a job and sleep for a year kept going until they couldn't pretend they hadn't heard her. Avery lifted a hand toward the power panel and then let it drop. Everyone was already watching the clock plate without needing to see it. And then, because rehooked is just the real word for ambulance, you felt it. Not a sound at first, a pressure, the kind you get in your ears when a train enters a tunnel. The mirrors took on the oil-slick rainbow that glass gets when it's stressed. The lights along the Carnival snapped into a rhythm not their own, and held it like a metronome that doesn't care who's trying to sing. Somewhere off to the left, a baby began to cry and could not stop. A teenage boy reached for his girlfriend's hand and missed it by an inch, even though he was looking right at it. Inside the funhouse, movement the way heat moves above pavement. Gentle at first, a bend, then a swell. The mirrors showed emptiness, and then too quickly for comfort, not emptiness. Figures pressing up from a corridor that architecture did not provide. Mouths forming words that glass ate. Palms striking like hail from the wrong sky. You wanted to tell yourself you were seeing your own fear reflected back. But then one face arrived that belonged to nobody on the Midway. An older woman with Laura's chin and Michael's eyes. A face that could have been theirs if time had been kind. She lifted her hands, and her fingers aligned exactly with the prints Monroe had lifted from the funhouse frame 3 summers before. "Stop," Monroe said, not to her, not to Avery, not to the crowd, but to time itself. Do not match, she pointed to the watches, to the phones. Agents began to power down in a flurry of shame and relief. The clock plate hummed as if it had been waiting. The needle quivered at 5 minutes off, and held. Avery made a decision. He stepped toward the door with the heavy bar and looked back just once at the families. If we open, he said quietly, we don't get to choose what comes through. First, the line of parents moved like a tide. Some forward, some back, all of them breaking. That was when the funhouse chose. 3 knocks, the same unhurried cadence. A fourth, too soft to be heard but felt in the bones. The calliope music blurred as if played underwater, and then mercifully stopped. In the hush that followed, every reflective surface within sight mirrors, windows, phone screens, chrome on the bumper cars, showed the same impossible scene. A corridor you could not walk, lined with people you loved, lit by a light you couldn't name. Michael lifted 2 fingers in a sign he'd used 1,000 times to get Laura's attention across a room. Laura laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes the shoulders, and the sound made it across whole. Don't, someone whispered. Duarte realized it was coming from the little girl at her side, the one who had gone barefoot to remember how to feel the ground. They said don't look, but you did. Everyone did. Human beings are mirrors built to search for faces. For a full breath the world matched itself. You could feel it. The second hands aligned. The metronome of generators and hearts and a clock behind a wall that should not exist ticked on the same beat. And in that heartbeat something slid. Tickets fell. They came from nowhere and everywhere at once, fluttering like yellow moths, a soft paper rain. They landed on shoulders, in hair, on the sill of the funhouse door. Some were blank. Some had numbers that matched nothing. 2 drifted in, stuck wetly to the glass where Laura's hands had been. When Avery peeled one back, ink smeared into his skin. 4 words, ragged and written as if by a moving car. We can't come first. The floodlights flickered. The clock needle twitched toward 0. A sound gathered in the mirrors like a breath turning into a scream. Sheriff Monroe grabbed the bar. Avery grabbed the other end. Duarte raised the camera because what else was there to raise? Parents surged because love is a physics you don't argue with. And then all the lights went out. Darkness fell over the fairgrounds so suddenly it felt less like the power had cut and more like the world itself had blinked. For a moment there was nothing, no music, no generators, no shouts, only the shuffle of feet and the sharp, panicked breaths of hundreds of people realizing they could no longer see each other. Then the mirrors began to glow. Not with electricity, but with a kind of light that had no source. A pale shimmer spread across the glass, illuminating faces that weren't standing on the midway. Parents screamed. Some clutched their children tighter, others turned and ran, only to find themselves reflected endlessly in every pane of glass. The glow pulsed like a heartbeat, synchronized across every mirror, first slow, then faster, until it was nearly impossible to tell whether it was the light or your own pulse you were feeling. And then they appeared, Michael and Laura, clearer than ever before. They stood just beyond the glass, their hands pressed flat against it. They looked older than the last Polaroid, as if time had passed for them somewhere else. Michael's hair was longer, his eyes darker, but his posture slightly to one side was still the same. Laura's dress was torn at the shoulder, her expression caught between relief and terror. Their lips moved, but no sound came through. Only the soft thud of palms against the glass. Duarte raised her camera and snapped furiously, her heart hammering. Each flash reflected off the mirror and back into her eyes, blinding her briefly. But in the after images she swore she saw not just Michael and Laura, but dozens of others, men, women, children, faces pale and distorted, pressed against the wrong side of the mirror. Some looked desperate, others eerily calm, as if they had been waiting for years to be seen. Open it, someone screamed. A father broke from the crowd and hurled his shoulder against the chained funhouse door. Sheriff Monroe shouted for him to stop, but 2 more parents followed, slamming their fists against the wood. The FBI agents drew closer, but their faces betrayed hesitation. If they stopped the families, they would be the villains. If they let them continue, they might be opening a door no one could close. The pounding grew, first fists, then shoulders, then boots. The wood splintered with each strike, the glow in the mirrors brightened. Michael and Laura's faces came closer, clearer, as though the glass was thinning. Avery barked orders, but his voice cracked. He no longer sounded like an agent. He sounded like a man terrified of what might happen if the door gave way. And then, in a single unified motion, the families broke through. The door crashed inward, chains rattling across the floor. A rush of cold air blasted out, smelling of damp earth and rusted metal. The mirrors inside flared, casting long beams of unnatural light across the midway. People staggered back, shielding their eyes, but a few mothers, fathers, siblings surged forward, screaming the names of their loved ones. What they saw inside was worse than absence. The funhouse was no longer a simple maze of mirrors. It was endless. A corridor that stretched far beyond the dimensions of the building, lined with reflections that weren't reflections at all. People stood within the glass, pounding, pleading, their mouths forming silent words. Some faces were familiar, Michael and Laura. Others belonged to people no one in Fairview had ever seen, decades of the vanished. All pressed into the walls of a place that shouldn't exist. One of the protesters saw, young woman clutching a missing poster of her brother, reached for the glass. Her fingertips touched it, and for a heartbeat, yielded like water. Her hands slipped through. Gasps erupted from the crowd. She turned, eyes wide, her voice trembling. "I can feel him," she whispered. "He's here." She leaned further in, desperate, until Sheriff Monroe yanked her back, breaking contact. The mirror snapped solid again. The young woman collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Duarte kept filming, her hands shaking so violently the camera nearly slipped from her grip. She whispered to herself, "This is it. This is proof." But deep down she knew proof wasn't what they needed. Proof wouldn't bring Michael and Laura back. Proof wouldn't close whatever door had been opened. The mirrors began to crack. Hairline fractures spread across the glass, spiderwebbing outward. With each fracture came a sound, voices muffled at first, then sharper. Pleas, cries, screams. The missing were no longer silent. They were calling out, hundreds of voices layered together, each begging to be freed. The sound built to a roar that rattled the midway, shook the floodlights, and made every heart in Fairview pound like it would burst. "Shut it down," Avery bellowed, shoving past the crowd. He lunged for the power panel, fumbling at the clock. Switch. His hand hovered for a second, the needle quivering between times. Then he forced it down. The mirrors went black. The voices cut off. The light died. And the midway was silent again. Families screamed, clawing at the glass, desperate for the voices to return. Some collapsed to their knees, sobbing. Others cursed Avery, calling him a coward, a murderer. Sheriff Monroe stood frozen, her hand trembling at her side, her eyes locked on the blank glass. Duarte lowered her camera slowly, her breath ragged. She knew she had captured everything: the glow, the faces, the voices, but already she feared what the film would show once developed. Proof had a way of disappearing when it came to the carnival. Then, as the agents moved to clear the crowd, a single mirror at the far end flickered faintly. Only Duarte noticed. She lifted her camera one last time. In that flicker, Michael and Laura appeared again, their faces pressed close, their eyes wide with urgency. They mouthed one final message: "Don't stop looking," and then they were gone. By morning, the Bureau had turned the midway into a geometry of tape, cones, and clipboards, and yet nothing they did could restore the shape of the night that had just been broken. People walked as if stepping through the memory of glass, careful, heads down. The official line hardened before lunch: power anomaly, mass hysteria, trespass into a hazardous structure, and the words slid over Fairview like oil on water. Deputies cleared the lot. Agents seized cameras. A man with a polite voice and a hard smile explained to Isabella Duarte that her film would be processed by federal labs. She did not argue. She had learned by now that arguments only taught the other person how to talk longer. She went back to her motel, locked the door, and opened the camera she had used second. The one nobody frisked because it looked too cheap to matter. The roll she tugged from its belly was warm from her body heat. Her hands shook so hard she had to sit on them for a minute before she could pry the canister open. The town split along a seam no map could show. On one side were the people who wanted to break the door down again and keep breaking it until either the door or they were gone. On the other were the ones who had read 4 words on a wet ticket and could not stop hearing them. "We can't come first." They covered mirrors with dish towels. They stuck tape over the corner clocks on their television screens. They taught their children a rule that made no sense and then made all the sense. If the music stops, close your eyes. At City Hall, a woman, spoke softly into a microphone, and called herself a survivor of nothing anyone could name. "We look because love looks," she said. "But maybe this thing eats looking." Nobody applauded. They stood and breathed and went home. Washington tried to put Fairview back in a folder. Subpoenas were issued. Private hearings were held. A letterhead with an eagle owned by no branch the sheriff recognized arrived with a request for all materials relating to anomalous timekeeping. Robert Avery, who had started the case as a man in a good suit and become the suit of a man, flew east and said the words he could say and didn't say the ones he couldn't. In a committee room without cameras, he was handed a memo on Old Onion skin that somebody had carbon copied in 1963, Project Ferryman. The top line read, "Because all secrets eventually choose stupid poetry, do not synchronize," said another, underlined twice. "Vehicle anchors only. Personnel prohibited." Avery pinched the bridge of his nose. "Sir," he said to the man who handed it to him, "this is a ghost story." The man nodded like he was being praised. Duarte didn't wait for the labs. She turned her bathroom into a dark room, the shower rod into a drying line, the towel rack into a shelf for trays. When the negatives bloomed, her heart did the thing hearts do when the world behaves like it should. It leaped. Shapes she recognized appeared in the emulsion hands on glass, the shine of eyes, the crease in the shoulder of a torn dress, and then did the thing the world kept doing to her. They thinned, frame by frame. The faces bleached away as the fixer took. By the end, she had a stack of clean strips, showing floodlights, plywood, and her own shadow. Only one square stayed wrong. In that one, overlaid faintly where the mirror seam had been, was a time code that didn't belong to any camera she owned. 22 hours, 6 minutes, and 55 seconds, -5. She held it up to the bulb and laughed without humor. "All right," she said softly into the empty room. "Rules." Sheriff Monroe had reached the rule phase herself. She carried a pocket metronome and set it on counters, filing cabinets, the hood of her cruiser, anything flat. She made deputies stop talking for 30 seconds while she listened to the ticks and watched the second hand of her old Timex decide whether to be a friend. "If it drifts toward you," she told them, "clear the room." They did not understand, but they cleared the room. She drove by the fairground lot every night, windows down, and when the air had that tight tunnel pressure, she went home without being asked to prove anything. The country wanted a show. They got one. A network booked a live town hall in the high school gym, a stage with 3 chairs and 3 microphones, Avery in the middle, stone-faced, Monroe to his right, hands folded like she was trying not to pray, Duarte to his left, hair pulled back, binder labeled the pattern at her feet. Families filled the bleachers, signs coiled in their laps like sleeping snakes. The host said words about healing and responsibility. Duarte said words about roots and registries. Monroe said one hard sentence: "If you love them, don't match." The clocks. Avery opened his mouth to push the river back, and the lights above them flickered, just once, like the gym had blinked. Half the audience touched their watches, in living rooms across the country. People watching at home saw the graphic in the lower corner of their screens live, 8:11 p.m., jumped to 8:12 and back again, and laughed without liking it. Midway through, the host turned to a wall of glass the network had trucked in for demonstration. It was a foolish thing, and everybody knew it, and they did it anyway because people like to be near the edge of a cliff as long as someone has painted a line. "These are standard mirrors," he said, "not funhouse, not rigged." You could hear the sentence trying to convince itself. He asked Monroe to stand. She did. She walked to the wall, stopped the width of a hand away, and lifted her palm. Nothing happened. Relief rippled the gym like air conditioning. Then a child in the 3rd row sneezed, a small involuntary sound that bent the beat of the room, and every earpiece on the stage clicked with a low, pure tone. Duarte's head snapped sideways. "Don't," she said into her mic, to nobody and everybody. The time bug on the broadcast flickered again, in the glass, where there should have been only a deputy and a scoreboard. A corridor nobody built, unfurled like it had been resting there all along. 2 figures stepped into I told her by a handful of birthdays. Eyes the same end pressed their hands to the other side of Monroe's palm. A billion people held their breath. Something like wind pushed through a room with all its doors closed. Avery didn't speak. He took one step toward the glass, stopped, and did the hardest thing a man like him can do. Nothing. The host made a cut gesture. Control cut the feed. On couches from Maine to Bakersfield, the screen went to a commercial for a car that gets good mileage. In the gym, the light died. When it came back, the glass was just glass again, and someone's voice was saying, "We are experiencing technical difficulties," as if difficulties were an experience you could vacation through. What followed didn't fit in a newscast. Phones across the country pinged with a calendar invite that had no sender. Fairview, tonight, 11:11. Some laughed and deleted it. Some screens froze and would not clear until the minute rolled past. In Fairview, Monroe watched. A young deputy's home weather station ticked 5 minutes forward in a single second. Duarte's motel television, unplugged since noon, woke by itself and displayed a map with one red pin. The old lot. Avery, back in his rental, found an envelope beneath the door containing a single token the size of a quarter, stamped "Admit" on one face and "Nothing first" on the other. He sat down on the bed without taking off his shoes and stared at it until it felt like it was looking back. By 10 the lot was a negative image of a fair, a frame waiting for a picture. No trucks had rolled in. No crew had hammered anything together. And yet a ribbed silhouette stood against the dark, the outline of walls without walls, corners without wood to make them. People gathered at the tape because people always do. Some carried candles, some carried hammers. Monroe told them to stay back. They stayed back the way people do when the ground is interesting. Duarte came with a bag of batteries and a camera. She hated and loved in equal measure. Avery came without a tie, without a line to recite. With only two things left, a rule and a coin. Wind moved through a structure that wasn't there, and made a sound like a calliope thinking. Somewhere deep, in the outline, 3 knocks answered a question nobody had asked out loud. The second hands on Monroe's Timex and Duarte's kitchen, clock back at the motel and a weather vane in Kansas, and a time bug in a network. Control room 3 states away all trembled toward each other like magnets with a decision to make. A child at the rope asked the right question, the only one that matters. If they can't come first, who does? The lights along the empty frame came on, not bulbs, not wires, a glow like breath on glass dot, and from somewhere past the shape of a door that was and wasn't, a voice you knew better than your own said with a joy that hurt, "We found the way." Every phone in Fairview lit with an unknown caller. The screen read, HOME. The phones rang in unison, hundreds of them, vibrating in pockets and purses, lighting up kitchen counters and bedside tables. Home. No number. Just that one word on the screens, pulsing white against black. Some people answered. Most froze, staring, hearts in their throats. Sheriff Monroe's deputies shouted at the crowd to keep back, but their own phones buzzed too. The word glaring at them like an accusation. When the first brave soul pressed accept, silence filled the line. Not static, not a dial tone so deep it roared in the ear. Then, faintly, as though whispered through miles of glass, came the voices, dozens, hundreds, layered on top of each other, pleading, laughing, crying. Among them, clear enough to cut the marrow, was Laura's voice. "Mom," she whispered, "we're still here." Laura's mother collapsed where she stood, clutching her phone as if it were her daughter's hand. Around her, more parents answered. More voices spilled through. Michael's father pressed his phone to his ear and swore he heard his son laughing softly, the same laugh he made when he fixed something with his hands. A woman screamed and dropped her phone onto the gravelet, had said her missing brother's name, though the screen still read home. Duarte lifted her recorder, trembling, trying to capture it, but the device crackled, refused to hold the sound. Every time the voices grew sharp enough to understand, the tape hissed and bent. It was as if whatever lived behind the mirrors refused to be trapped in plastic. She whispered, "Say it again, Laura, please say it again," but the voice faded, replaced by the roar of 1,000 others. Then the glow along the skeleton of the funhouse flared brighter, outlining walls that weren't built, corners that weren't nailed. Within that light, shadows moved, human shapes, pacing, pressing, reaching. The crowd surged forward, unable to resist. Some shouted their loved ones' names, some held out photographs, as if showing them missing their own faces could pull them back across. Monroe's deputies locked arms to hold them back, but one by one the line cracked. Parents slipped through, children followed. The first man to cross the tape approached the shimmering outline of a door. He lifted a hand and pressed it against the light it gave beneath his palm like fog. The crowd gasped. He turned, eyes wild. mouth trembling with a smile that had been waiting years. "It's them," he said. "They're here." He pushed harder. His arm slid through. He took one more step, and the glow swallowed him whole. The crowd erupted. Screams, sobs, shouts for restraint. Some surged after him, desperate. Others recoiled, horrified. Avery shouted himself hoarse. "No one crosses. Nobody crosses first." But the words were useless. Once the door had admitted one, it was no longer a door. It was an invitation. More figures stepped forward, the glow pulling at them. A mother dragged her teenage son back by his collar just as his fingertips brushed the light. The boy sobbed, clawing at her arms, begging to go. Another parent wasn't fast enough. Their daughter slipped through, vanishing into the glow with a cry of joy. No scream followed, no sound at all, just silence, heavy and thick. And then, from inside, came a knock. Slow, steady, 3 beats, the same cadence that had haunted Fairview for years. The crowd froze, the glow flickered. In its shimmer appeared Michael and Laura once more, clearer than they had ever been, their hands pressed to the inside, their mouths moved. Duarte pushed to the front, her eyes locked on them. "What are you saying?" she screamed. "Tell us. What do you want us to do?" Laura's lips formed the words carefully, as though aware of the fragile line between worlds. Duarte read them, whispering each syllable out loud, her voice breaking. "Not yet." The glow flared one last time, bright enough to blind. Then it vanished. The lot went dark. The phones went silent. The skeleton of the funhouse dissolved into night. And those who had stepped into the glow were gone. Not a sound, not a trace, just empty ground and the echo of their names in the throats of those left behind. Fairview would never be the same. Parents wept in the dirt. Deputies dropped their badges. Avery stared at his hands like they were stained with something he couldn't wash off. Duarte clutched her useless recorder, her body shaking, her mind burning with what she had read on Laura's lips. "Not yet," which left only one question to devour the town, the bureau, and the world beyond. If not yet, then when? By the time the sun rose on Fairview again, the town had learned a new kind of quiet, not the Sunday morning hush of closed shops and birdsong, a careful, listening quiet, a quiet that watched mirrors and avoided clocks and stepped around shadows that looked too straight for the hour. People spoke in kitchens like churches, palms on counters, as if steadying the house itself. You could feel it, standing where the midway used to beat the weight of names, the echo of a crowd that had once rushed a light and found only darkness waiting back. The bureau wrote reports. Of course they did. Words like electrical anomaly and public disturbance stacked themselves into tidy paragraphs that made the night look smaller than it had been. Agents boxed what they could. The token stamped admit one, the untorn tickets, a dozen phones that had all shown the same impossible caller. They packed them like artifacts from a country no one wanted to admit existed. Robert Avery stared at the paperwork as if it had a pulse. He signed his name in the blank where the government asks men to prove they were present when the world tilted, and then politely tilted back. Families counted the missing again. Not the old missing, the long list that had become a litany, but the new ones. A father who'd stepped through first. A girl whose mother couldn't pull her back in time. A brother who had told his sister just one touch, and then vanished into a glow that didn't burn. The sheriff put her hand on each shoulder she could reach, and said the thing grief needs. Even when it doesn't believe it. We are not done. Duarte locked her motel door and developed a roll of film she already knew would betray her. Most frames washed blank in the tray, refusing to hold the light they had once seen, but not all. 3 squares kept something. In one, Laura's palm against glass, the crescent birthmark near the thumb clear as a signature. In another, Michael's, face caught mid-word, mouth shaping the syllable that had seemed to stop time. Not. In the third, smaller and stranger, the seam of air where the door had been was visible as a bend in the night, as if the darkness itself had a hinge. She drove to Laura's mother's house and sat at the kitchen table. The way reporters aren't supposed to. She pushed the photos across the laminate and waited. The woman did not cry. She nodded once, tucked the pictures under the salt shaker like paperweights could anchor a world, and whispered, "Then she knew we were there." After a while, Duarte asked the question that had been gnawing her since the lot went dark. If they can't come first, what does that mean? Laura's mother looked at the window she had kept covered for a year and said, "It means we don't decide the order of miracles. Washington did what Washington does. Hearings without cameras. memos with names nobody had to sign. Avery flew east and came back with a new word he didn't want: interagency. He brought Sheriff Monroe a single page on onion skin that smelled like old basements and secrets. Project Ferryman clock discipline. Do not synchronize. Vehicle anchors only. Personnel prohibited. Containment preferred over retrieval. She read it twice and set it down like it might bite. So they knew, she said, not a question. Avery didn't answer. He folded the page back into its envelope as if refolding could put the year back where it belonged. Fairview learned rules the way small towns learn weather: by what it does to you. Don't match the clocks. Don't stare into glass when the music stops. Don't say a name into a mirror after midnight. Parents taped over microwave displays and stove lids. They wore watches with hands instead of numbers and set them 5 minutes off from whatever the rest of the state believed. The high school custodian draped the trophy case in paper. The barber painted his wall mirror with soap at closing and left it there, foam white like frost. Even through the July heat, when someone forgot and wiped a pane clean, folks turned their faces away the way people do at funerals. Not because they're afraid to look, but because they're afraid to love what they see. And still, there were sightings, not of men in vans or shadows in alleys, but of reflections that didn't consent to be reflections. A diner window at 2 a.m. where a waitress swore she saw a corridor, long and wrong and illuminated by nothing she could name. A chrome hubcap that caught a face no one standing there owned. A baby monitor in a ranch house 3 miles out that woke a mother with steady knocks through a speaker that wasn't plugged in. 3 beats, always. 3. Duarte followed the Carnival's paperwork like a pilgrim follows relics. Leases, fuel receipts, insurance riders notarized in towns that didn't exist anymore. The circuit drew itself across a map with the arrogant grace of something that had been allowed to travel too long. Along that route she found other Fairviews wearing different names. A lake town in Missouri with a decade-old rumor about a rowboat that came to the surface without the men who'd taken it out. A county fair in Ohio where the funhouse had closed for repairs on a night nobody remembered hearing laughter. A desert stop where the wind was said to sing through scaffold pipes in a key that made dogs whine. She built a list in a binder and called it what it was: the pattern. When she sent it to a national magazine, an editor called to say the word paranormal tested badly with Midwestern readers. She said she wasn't writing a ghost story. She was writing a map. Avery thought about quitting. He told himself he'd send his resignation on paper, in ink, the way men used to. He put the letter on his desk and did not sign it. He carried the coin admit, one on one side, nothing first on the other, in his pocket as both proof and penance. At night, in a room the government had paid for, he set the coin on the alarm clock and watched the time bug slide 5 minutes forward and then back again, like a tide trying to remember which way home was. Sheriff Monroe kept driving loops around the lot. Some nights nothing happened but ditches and crickets and the honest boredom that saves lives. Some nights the air tightened like a tunnel. On those nights she took out the little metronome and set it on the hood and told it to be stubborn. When the ticks stuttered, she went home. Not because she was afraid, because she had learned that courage and care are twins, and one always dies first. In late autumn, a cardboard box arrived at the newspaper office. No return address. No stamps. It was simply there when the editor unlocked the door. Inside, 3 Polaroids wrapped in wax paper and a set of Carnival wristbands bound together with twine. The bands were stamped July 1976 but were unworn, their plastic tabs unbroken. The photos were of a car interior dashboard cracked, rearview mirror with yarn dice, a woman's knee in a torn dress, a man's hand on the shifter, knuckles scarred from 1,000 small jobs done without complaint. Michael, Laura, alive, in the border of the last print. The chemical streak formed a number like a date burned sideways. 1996. Someone at the paper said the word hoax like a life raft. The lab said the chemistry didn't lie. The town gathered in the church basement. The folding chairs thumped open. Coffee steamed in urns like an old habit that still worked. People studied the photos the way farmers study sky, reading whether their boy asked if the carnival would come back at Christmas. The room shivered and told him no, not at Christmas, not here. And still, candles burned on a card table where the names were listed, and nobody blew them out when they went home. That winter taught patience. Snow covered the lot and softened the shapes so that nothing looked like a door unless you wanted it to. The phones stayed quiet. The mirrors held their peace. For a while, people believed in the ordinary again. Then the new year came, and with it a single envelope slipped beneath Sheriff Monroe's office door. Inside, a ticket printed on cardstock too heavy for a ride that could shake itself apart in a week. Admit one, it said. Fairview, Midway, July 17. No year, no time. On the back, in a hand that looked tired and strong at once, 4 words. We'll try your way. No one agreed on what your way meant. Duarte said it meant the clocks. Avery said it meant the order. Monroe said it meant we don't force a door, we hold it and let the wind decide. Families argued gently, and sometimes not gently at all. The town put up a sign at the lot's entrance. No structures, nitrogen monoxide, electrical nitrogen monoxide, events, nitrogen monoxide exceptions. The sign looked brave in daylight. At night it looked like a child holding a broom against a tide. Spring turned to summer, and with it came a heat that made the asphalt smell like memory. On July 17th, the date on the ticket, the date that had become a scar, the town didn't plan anything. They told themselves they would live a normal day. People mowed. People grilled. People went to work. At 8:11 p.m., every phone in Fairview vibrated once, a soft hum, as if the devices had all remembered something at the same time. No screen lit up, no caller ID, just a single pulse in the hand. The metronome on Monroe's kitchen table ticked, and then hesitated, and then refused to be hurried. The coin on Avery's nightstand rotated a quarter turn by no means he could see, and stopped with nothing first facing up. In a motel a county over, Duarte stared at an unplugged television until her own face in the black screen blinked. You stand where the gate might be, not because you plan to open it, but because you've learned that not looking is just another way of staring. You breathe and tell yourself you will not call out names. The air cools around your wrists. 3 knocks rise through the ground like a train easing into a station. When the light comes, it isn't bright. It's the light of a hallway you've been down 1,000 times in dreams, the light of a door you keep meaning to open and never do. It outlines nothing and everything. In it, shapes gather. Michael, older by years, you didn't give him permission to live. Laura, her chin up in that way that made you love her before you knew her. Behind them, a crowd, children in Sunday shoes. A line worker with grease still under his nails. A woman with a locket pressed to her throat. A boy on the edge of a laugh he's been saving. Their mouths move. You can't hear. You can read. Not yet was for then. Tonight their lips shape something else. Soon, the light wavers. The phones stay still. The metronome ticks on its own stubborn beat. The door not a door, just a kindness in the dark wait. You hold the line without ropes or tape. The way people hold a riverbank when the river rises, with faith and with fist and with the knowledge that the water will have the last word, and maybe that's the point. Maybe all this was never about opening or closing or choosing who goes first. Maybe it was always about how you stand at the edge without tipping in, how you carry names without letting them drag you under, how you keep a town from becoming only the thing it lost. So here is where I leave you for now, in a field where a carnival used to roar, with a coin in a pocket that won't pick a side, with a binder full of roots that lead both everywhere and back to the beginning, with a sheriff who listens to a metronome like it's an oracle, with an agent who finally knows that not all doors are his to order, with a mother who keeps a light in her window not to guide anyone home, but so the house remembers how. And here is where I ask you what I cannot answer. Was this a project buried under stamps and signatures, a government clock that slipped its leash? Was it something older that learned how to ride mirrors the way storms ride coastlines? Was it a curse, a door, a ferryman paid with tickets instead of coins? Or was it, as it has always felt, a love story refusing to end on our schedule? Tell me what you believe. Tell me if you think they're prisoners or travelers, if the funhouse is a machine or a mouth, if the rule is mercy or warning. Tell me if you would have stepped through. Because some stories were never meant to stay buried. Don't let them vanish. Keep them alive with us.